Today we're looking at Proverbs 16, and it's interesting. It's one of those that actually has a lot of wonderful gems in it. It has a lot of wonderful things in it, and I don't want to spend an hour on it. But you go through this one, mark some of these, and there's some others that they're very similar to prudence and wisdom and righteousness. All the ways of the Lord, all the ways of man are clean in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. He weighs the spirit, not what you're doing, but your motivations of why you're doing it. Commit thy works unto the Lord, and thy thoughts shall be established. If you want to be sure in your thoughts, commit the way to the Lord. Now, you might have to change your plan from time to time, but you can commit your ways to the Lord. By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. When a man's ways please the Lord, he maketh even his enemies to be at peace with him. It's interesting. If your ways please the Lord, your enemies will be at peace. We saw that with Solomon and some of the other kings of the southern kingdom. A just weight and balance are the Lord's. All the weights of the bag are his work. He wants just economics. If you're selling wheat for a penny, it's wheat for a penny. If you're selling barley for 2 pennies, it's barley for 2 pennies. How much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and get understanding rather chosen than silver. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. We hear that one a lot. Pride before a fall. Pride is not a problem, by the way. The emotions are not the problem. It's what you choose. Being proud to be an American, being proud to be a Christian, being proud that God has allowed me to be a father, that God's allowed me to be a husband. You can take pride in those things. Take pride in your work. Take pride in your accomplishments of what the Lord gave you. You know, it's like if a man gave you a field and you went and plowed it up and you put in seed and you had a harvest. You can be proud of the hard work you did, but it was the man's field. Better to it is to be a humble spirit with the lowly than to divide the spoil with the proud. And again, those that are proud of themselves, that see themselves. If you remember the story that Jesus told about the man who had a barn and built bigger barns, the idea of in pride, I'm building up because look what I did. And he said, thou fool, tonight your soul will be required of you. He that handleth the matter wisely shall find good, and whoever trusts the Lord, happy is he. You want to be happy? Trust in the Lord. Now, that doesn't mean some passive, well, God will take care of tomorrow. I'm not going to lay up. God will take care of tomorrow. No, working with the designs, working with the instruction, working with the patterns you see, and the patterns you see in your life, your parameters, how much money you have, what your job brings in, how many in your family, your health, your wife's health, all these other things. These aggregates, you work with those. And trusting the Lord to work all those out as you're working. Happy are you. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Even these ways that we think it's good to chase after money, chase after things, chase after people and experiences, but many of them lead to death. An ungodly man digs up evil, and his lips there is a burning fire. Think about that. An ungodly man or woman that goes and digs up evil. I'm going to dig back in your life. We're seeing this today with people on the internet. Well, they'll dig up things from the past, even going back a decade, just so I can find something pull out against you. And sometimes even those in our own households and those in our own relationships. I remember this and I remember that, and you said this and you did that. It's a terrible thing to do. I like the end of it is a hoary head is a crown of glory if it be found in the way of righteousness. In other words, a hoary head, the gray hairs. The gray hairs are a sign of glory if it's founded in righteousness. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit is better than he that taketh a city. If you want to take a city, this is your city. This mind of yours is your city. This life of yours is your city. The lot is cast in the lap, but the whole disposing of is the Lord's. What does the lot mean? I was talking about yesterday coincidence with a friend of mine, and yeah, we don't see coincidences very often. Maybe one or two things will be coincidental, but if there's three or more, there might be something here you need to look at. You know, we kind of do that if someone's sick. If you cough a couple of times, that might not be a big deal. If you're coughing a lot, that's not coincidence. So we see that as sickness. Again, same thing. If you hear a noise in your car, well, it might be one thing. If you hear that noise two or three times, that's not coincidence. Many times the lot is in the lap of the Lord. He decides the lot. He'll roll the dice sometimes. But you need to discern what that dice means, and he will help you with that. Very good chapter. Glean through this. There are other things that I could have talked about, This one seems to be filled with a lot of good information. Finishing up 2 Kings today, we're looking at chapters 24 and 25. We've already seen with these chapters in 2 Kings, we pick up the story where we have Josiah who came into power, and he wants to do what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He's 12. And like I was saying, he doesn't know any difference when he sees the houses of the Sodomites that are right next to the temple. When he goes in the temple and sees things to Baal in there, when he sees these things happening with groves and whatnot, pretty standard. It's all he's ever known. But he wants to rebuild the temple for Yahweh, like he's going to lift Yahweh up, or at least take Yahweh out of some destitution that's happened to the temple. And Hilkiah the priest comes across, of course, a copy of the Torah and reads it to him, and he rents his clothing, especially it seems about Deuteronomy, about how God will curse Israel if you do some of these things. And he looks out and he sees that they're doing these things. These things are normal. They're just every day now. And that he hates, and he finds things abominable that are right there in the temple, right next to the temple, things that are happening that are wrong, and he rents his clothing and starts making the necessary changes. He starts driving out the Baals, he starts driving out the Ashtoreth, he gets rid of all the high hills, he gets rid of the groves, he gets rid of other worshipers, he starts lifting up and extolling Yahweh above all others. He even institutes the Passover. They keep the Passover. He gets rid of workers with familiar spirits and wizards and images and idols and abominations that were spied in the land of Judah and Jerusalem. He put away. He went through the land of Judah. It wasn't just in Jerusalem, but in all of Judah. You will get rid of these things. And there was no king like him. He put all of his soul and all of his heart into it. And it says all of his soul with all of his might. Nonetheless, the Lord turned not from the fierceness of his wrath, wherein, because of all the provocations of Manasseh, had provoked him. So he's provoked. He's going to turn on Judah. He's going to take care of this. This will not happen by accident. It isn't just that he lifts the cup and Judah is attacked. He is now raising up Babylon to get to Judah for this. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah from my sight as I removed Israel. And so Josiah, and it's done other things, and it's written in other books, but Pharaoh Necho came up, and Pharaoh Necho was going to go and fight with Assyria, but he's kind of fighting along the way. Josiah goes up against him and is killed. And so what happened is he's killed, and Pharaoh Necho comes in. First Jehoahaz, his son, is put into power, but he doesn't stay very long. He's only there for 3 years. Pharaoh Necho, who is powerful over that area, takes him out and puts in Jehoiakim, who is nothing but more of a puppet for Pharaoh. So he is a Pharaoh puppet in charge of Israel, in charge of Judah. And so he reigns 25 years, but Jehoiakim, again, is just, he's 25 years old, when he starts to reign, and he reigns 11 years. And he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So here he is. We have in 24 that Nebuchadnezzar is now coming up in Babylon. He's becoming mighty. And he goes in, and he comes up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. So now there's a changing of the guards. First he was the servant of Pharaoh. Now here comes in the powerful Nebuchadnezzar. He decides to be a servant of Nebuchadnezzar. But then he turns and rebels against him, and this creates a problem. And the Lord sends against Jehoiakim bands of Syrians and Moabites and Ammonites and all these people. He seems like all the enemies of Israel are now coming against them. And again, this is a part of the wrath of God. When you see your enemies growing, when you see they're moving in on all fronts, this is because of the wrath of God, and God will not be quenched. This is something that America might need to learn. We think we can provoke God, we can push God off, and we can have all this innocent blood and all this hypersexuality and stuff, and he won't care. We'll find out one day that he might care. The worst thing that can happen is if he goes, you know what, I'm going to turn against you as much as I was for you. Surely the commandment of the Lord came upon Judah to remove them out of his sight, because of the innocent blood that was shed in Jerusalem, and the innocent blood that God would not pardon. He won't pardon it. If you go to say, I'm sorry for the innocent blood, I'm sorry for the innocent blood, he goes, nope, that one's not pardoned. I will not. You knew. And the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim are there in the Chronicles. He slept, and his son Jehoiachin started to reign. Now Egypt did not come back up again. That's how powerful Babylon was becoming. is that Egypt kind of stayed down. They stayed away. It says that they didn't come again out of the land, for the king of Babylon had taken the river of Egypt from the river of Euphrates. So he went down and took mighty Egypt. And now Egypt was under them. And of course, here's Judah caught in the middle, with surrounded by the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. And this is just going to tighten the noose. That's all that's going to happen here. The whole book of Jeremiah is about this noose that gets tightened. And Jerusalem would not obey that you're going into wrath. Just go with them. No, we're the people of God, and we're going to stand this through. God is behind us. God is on our side. You can kind of hear parallels with today. So Jehoiachin comes in to reign, and he begins to reign, and he does evil in the sight of the Lord. Nebuchadnezzar comes up to the city and seizes it, and he goes in, and he takes away Jehoiachin. He takes Jehoiachin and all their family out. He takes them away into Babylon, and takes them there in the 18th year of his reign. And he takes all the treasures of the house of the Lord and he cut into pieces the vessels of gold which Solomon the king had made for the temple of the Lord. Now it's interesting, we're seeing the temple of the Lord being desecrated here, things being taken out and being taken. These are the ones that later on Belshazzar and will be toasting to God. If you remember, it'll be in the book of Daniel. And there's that writing on the wall. It'll be these same vessels that will be used there. They get carried away to Jerusalem, and all its princes and all the mighty men, even 10,000 captives, and carpenters and smiths, and there none remained but the poorest. The poorest were left behind to fend for themselves, and they would have to deal with now being governed by there were Jews in the area. The remnant went, but there was some in the area still, at least for a while. Then here would come another siege of Nebuchadnezzar. So he goes and wants to take Jehoiakim and all the mighty people. He'll come back again and make the place desolate and just take everybody away. So he goes the first time, and all the men were might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths were taken unto the king of Babylon, brought captive. And the king of Babylon made Zedekiah the prince there. He put Zedekiah. Again, this wasn't chosen by God. This is a brother of Jehoiakim, but he was put in by Zedekiah, and he later on tries to make a league with Egypt. I looked this up in Josephus and in history. He tries to make a league with Egypt against Babylon, and it fails, because God is using Babylon to wipe it. And Zedekiah was 21 years old. He reigned 11 years, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And though the anger of the Lord, it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judea, until he cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. He goes again and rebels against the king, and this time is when the king moves in. We're getting closer to the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is when, 9th of Av in 587 BC is when Jerusalem falls. Now remember, it was the 9th of Av in 70 AD when Jerusalem fell the second time. People always look every year at the 9th of Av to see if something big is going to happen prophetically. We see these dates. When you see same things happening on the same dates in here, take a notice. Remember, the lot is in the lap of the Lord. There are no really strong coincidences. I've said one or two. You might accidentally get something twice, but sometimes three or more. You haven't seen a third one yet, but also, remember, Passover was at the same time Christ was killed. And Christ was taken away as sin when we went into a period that was known as the unleavened bread. And then Christ came up, was resurrected on first fruits. The church was created by God with the Holy Spirit on the Feast of Pentecost. So we see things happening on certain days. So the 9th of Av is not unreal for people to keep one eye on the 9th of Av. I'd also keep an eye on the fall feast, where we have Yom Kippur and the Day of Atonement, and we have Tabernacles. There are things there that might happen. We've got a lot to keep an eye on. But in the 9th year of the reign, in the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against Jerusalem and pitched against it. So for a year, he sieged Jerusalem for a year. He had them built around. He built the bulwarks. He set it up. He took it, there was no water, there was starvation, and even horrible stories of things that were happening inside of Jerusalem. He does this. And on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people. This is the 9th of Av, the 9th day of the 4th month after the ceremonial year began with Nisan, and the 4th month would be Av, and of course the 9th of Av is when the fall happened. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night through the gates, which is by the king's garden. The army of the Chaldees pursued them and overtook them in Jericho. So the king left with the army and left the poor people by themselves to fend for themselves. A nice king. Nebuchadnezzar goes after him, finds him there. He brings him back, and he took the king and brought him to Riblah, and he gave judgment upon him, and he slew all of his sons and then put out his eyes. So he killed that line and then put out the eyes of Zedekiah, because Zedekiah was a seditionist. He was rebelling against Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, he goes into Jerusalem. He burns the house of the Lord. So we see the temple being burned. Everything's being melted. There is speculation that somewhere between Solomon and now, the Ark of the Covenant was taken away. We don't know what the Bible says about it. I don't think Josephus says anything about it. They did not have the Ark of the Covenant. If they'd have had that, of course they would have showcased it. Of course they would have approached it. Of course they would have, set it up as something to see as a trophy. But many people believe, and this is historical speculation, okay, fine, that it was spirited away by some people, and it's somewhere. Some people think it might be hidden somewhere in Jerusalem. Some people think it's down in Ethiopia with Ethiopian Jews. I don't know where it is. Indiana Jones didn't find it. Well, he did, but then it got lost. Anyway, going on, that they burnt the house of the Lord and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every man's house burnt he, and they broke the walls of Jerusalem. And so they started creating, putting in some vessels, some people, or some governors, I should say, to govern that area. They took down the pillars of brass at the house of the Lord and broke them into pieces. All the pots and the shovels and snuffers and spoons, they took them away. The fire pans and the bowls, the 2 pillars in the seas that Solomon made, they took all of this. The captain of the guard took the priest, and they took them out, those that ministered, and they brought them in, and they killed them in Riblah. Riblah seemed to be a place of judgment that was created by Nebuchadnezzar. I'll go to this place for judgment. So they went to Riblah, and the king of Babylon smote them there at Riblah in the land of Hamath, and Judah was carried away. And all the people that remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar left, he made Gedaliah was the governor over them. So if anybody stayed, they were governed. So they were not free. They couldn't even worship Yahweh anymore. They couldn't worship Jehovah anymore because everything was gone. This had been wiped like a plate, just like God had said. So Gedaliah is the governor over them, and he swore to them, "Fear not, dwell in the land and serve the king, and it'll go well." So he's going to try to, boost up morale. You got to serve me, everything will be okay. But in the 7th month, Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah. No, this is not the Ishmael of again, not the Ishmael, of course, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's a different name of this person. But Ishmael is there. And he smote Gedaliah and died, and the Jews of them remained there. So he now takes over power from them. And the people, both great and small, armies rose and came to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldees. So many of the people also went down to live in Egypt. So this has been done. You've wiped it like a plate. Everybody's gone up to Babylon. Some went down to Egypt. Only the poorest of the poor were left there, but they had a foot over them. Someone making sure that they stay down. Now Jehoiachin was the king of Judah. Remember, he was taken up there. And on the 7th and 20th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he did reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin out of prison. So they put the king into prison, but the king of Babylon lifts him up, brings him out, changes garments, and shows respect unto Jehoiachin, and he lives with him in his house for the rest of his days. So you have the king of Babylon the king of Judah respected by the king of Babylon. And you see this interesting that even though it's been wiped as a plate, in Babylon we now have a remnant that's in amongst the people. And we'll see this later with Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah. But you also have the king has the respect of the king. And so again, the king, there's something about the king of Judah that demands respect here. Maybe he was a good man. I didn't really say whether he was a good or bad man. Let me go back and see. But we do have the respect. And so he's being respectful. My whole point is that there's still threads. This isn't all over. And we know that these threads get picked up in 70 years. We have the book of Jeremiah in this time, and then Ezekiel. Then will come Daniel. So you have those three prophets going through. Historically speaking, we'll go back to Chronicles, which is 2 books about the history of Jerusalem. We're going to back up a bit, cover some ground again. Then when we move forward, I'm going to skip the prophets and try to finish history. Go off to Ezra and Nehemiah, and close history where it closes. It closes not with Malachi. Malachi is the last book of the Old Testament, but it's not the last historical book. The last historical book that gives us any kind of history is Nehemiah. So again, backing up a little bit, getting a running start at what is the city of God and what happened with the city of God, then to Esther, then to Ezra and Nehemiah. So that's gonna be the framework, and then we'll go into the major and minor prophets, and then on we go. So, and I'll hit some of the poetry books also. When I finish Proverbs, I might stop and do a poetry book at a time, do Lamentations at a time. It's all going to be planned out. It's not over. We're going to keep moving. There's a lot of good stuff to come. We haven't even seen some of the best stuff yet. Thank you.